What's up, Raiders? Today we are going to teach you how to play the brand new specialization added to World of Warcraft Dragonflight, the Augmentation Evoker. This is a brand new specialization within the game that fills a very unique role that has not yet to exist. That is called support. This new support role is going to change up the status of raids significantly. I'm going to call this right now that this is going to be a mandatory raid spot that someone's going to have to fill from now on in all competitive and progression-based content. According to the developers, the support role is going to replace one of the DPS in your raid. It is not supposed to replace a healer, and they're going to try and balance it around, making sure that this does not remove a heal spot and does indeed focus on removing one of your DPS in exchange for this new support style. This new role is going to have its job in making the raid more effective than usual. It's going to increase stats, add additional effects, and just buff your team in general, making them more durable as well as doing more damage. So I hope this got you all pumped up and ready to learn more about the Evoker. Let's get into the details of this spec. Sazaze. Alright, so let's talk about the style of this specialization. So we're dipping into the chronological time powers of Bronze Dragonflight magic with the empowering abilities of the Black Dragonflight. We're then finally going to take a light dip into the Red Dragonflight for the destructive fire magic. So let's talk about the resources we're going to have. You're going to have mana. This is the main resource, and it's going to be, most of your spells are going to have a mana cost, and you're going to have to be monitoring that a little bit. As you are a damage dealer class, the mana cost isn't going to be that significant, and you're not going to be playing quite like a healer where mana management is that important. Outside of mana, you have essence. Some of your abilities are going to generate essence, and other abilities are going to spend that essence. Essence spenders are very powerful, and you're going to be wanting to make sure to maintain those essence values and making sure that you do not overcap on essence. You have the remaining duration of your Ebb and Might buff as a bar on your resource. This is an easy way to track if your Ebb and Might buff is currently available and on the target. So let's get into these abilities. First up are our two filler spells. That is Living Flame and Azure Strike. Both of these are going to be spammed throughout your play depending on the state of the game. So if you're in high movement situation, you're going to be spamming Azure Strike just to get some damage out. And if you're in a situation where you can stand still, you're going to be using Living Flame to deal damage or possibly to top off healing targets. Your most important ability is Ebb and Might. This is a buff that's going to go on 4 targets with a 30-second cooldown, 10-second duration. This is going to give your 4 nearest allies primary stat increases, as well as increase your damage output by 10%. This ability will prioritize damage dealers. If there are healers in range and damage dealers, it is going to go on the damage dealers first. Really, the entire purpose of this class is to keep Ebb and Might out as much as you possibly can. Because of the 10-second duration and 30-second cooldown, it is not going to have 100% uptime unless you play the class to perfection with other abilities. Next up is Prescience. This is going to be a 12-second cooldown, 18-second duration buff that goes into a target and increases their critical strike chance by 3%. It's also going to occasionally copy their damaging and healing spells at 15% additional power. You're going to want to maintain this thing's uptime on 2 targets as much as you possibly can. So you're going to be casting it on 1 target, waiting for the 12-second cooldown, and then casting it onto somebody else. After the first buff falls off, you're going to go back to the first, and back and forth. Both targets will not have 100% uptime on this buff, but if you're only focusing 100% on 1 target, you're going to be wasting huge percentages of uptime that you could possibly have if you split it. Next up are our 2 empowered spells. So these are going to be spells that you have to channel up, and the intensity is going to change how long you channel. They're also going to increase the duration of your Ebb and Might buff on all targets every time you cast these abilities. So we want to keep these things on cooldown to make sure that we are getting that maximum uptime of Ebb and Might. The first empowered ability is Fire Breath, and we want to charge this thing up to maximum every time. This does a huge hit of damage onto the target and is one of our highest damage output abilities. Next up is Upheaval, and unlike Fire Breath, this one we don't often want to empower. Empowering it is going to increase the radius of its effect, but most of the time the 3-yard radius is enough to do the damage that we want. The only time you're going to empower this ability is if there is a loosely spread group of enemies that you want to hit with all of it. Make sure that you have the Ebb and Might buff out before you begin either of these abilities. You don't want Ebb and Might to have fallen off because the duration increase of Ebb and Might from these empowered abilities is one of the most important parts of casting the empowered abilities. Your essence spender is Eruption, and you're going to want to use this thing every time you can. as long as you have the Ebon Might buff up. It splits all of its damage between all nearby targets, so it doesn't really matter if there's one target or multiple when you cast it, it does the same total damage. This also increases the duration of your Ebon Might effect, so you definitely want to be using this thing as much as you can to get that Ebon Might lasting longer. Blistering Scales is a really cool 30-second cooldown that goes onto a target, increasing their armor by 30%. With some talents, it'll also give them a shield of damage reduction, and every time they get struck, they will explode with a little bit of fiery damage. This is a really cool effect. It's a great way to save other targets, as well as it's a great way to just give additional damage out for yourself. You're probably going to be casting this thing on cooldown on the tanks in most encounters, and it auto-casts on the target of your target if you're targeting a hostile. If you took Symbiotic Bloom, you're going to be shooting out Emerald Blossom every chance you get to put out a little bit of healing and put out a passive effect on the target based off your talents. If you pick up Prolonged Life, using Emerald Blossom is going to give a buff out similar to Ebon Might onto the targets that increases their healing received. I think this is going to be really valuable, and I think all evokers should be going for this constant uptime. With Ancient Flame, Emerald Blossom also increases the cast time of your next Living Flame, and Scarlet Adaptation makes it so that you can store up to a percentage of your healing done to make your Living Flame more powerful. Verdant Embrace allows you to fly to a target and heal them. It's great for repositioning if somebody is where you already want to be, as well as it gives the healers a nice little save on a target that is needing a burst of healing quickly. That's all your basic skills, so let's look at your cooldowns and more influential abilities. Hover gives you a boost of movement speed, as well as allows you to cast while moving. Aspect's Favor and Draconic Attunement are going to allow you to give nearby allies a burst of movement speed when you cast Hover. Quell is your interrupt, and it's got a decent range on it. You're able to shut down those casting targets, help your team gather them up, or to stop major effects. Rescue allows you to target another player, fly to them, and then move them to a new location. This can be a really cool ability and has a really high mastery peak on it. Tip the Scales allows you to make your next empowered ability cast at maximum rank instantaneously. This can be really great at certain moments of the fight that you don't really want to stand there channeling out a 3-stack Fire Breath and you just want an instantaneous cast one. Cauterizing Flame allows you to remove a whole set of debuffs from one ally target. This can remove several critical debuffs. It's a very powerful cleanse, and it's amazing this is available on a non-healer. Landslide sends out shards of earth forward that grip onto targets and root them in place. Zephyr lifts up your 4 closest allies into the air and gives them a burst of movement speed. It also reduces all damage they take from AoE effects. Obsidian Scales is your personal cooldown to reduce incoming damage taken. But, along with Aspect's Favor and Draconic Attunement, it also becomes a mini rallying cry, boosting the maximum HP of your 4 nearest allies by a significant amount. Just be careful not to cast Hover after you've cast Obsidian Scales if you're relying on that Rallying Cry, because Hover is then going to overwrite the Rallying Cry style buff with the increased movement speed style buff from that Bronze Attunement. Timelessness is a bit of a weird talent. It reduces the threat of the target that you cast it on significantly. This can be kind of useful in scenarios where you want to have big AoE and you don't want to have to wait for the tank to generate threat to be able to start generating it. Spatial Paradox is a really powerful talent. It enhances one of your healing allies, allowing them to cast while moving, increasing the range of their healing spells by 100%, and is just so powerful in the raid environment. Not something you can cast, but the talent Motes of Possibility causes you to create little tiny motes that float around near you, and if an ally touches it, it removes 10 seconds from the cooldown of their major ability. This is a really cool ability, and if you were to coordinate that with a very important character, it could be a very powerful combo. Time Spiral is a quick ability that allows your allies to reactivate their major movement ability even if it's on cooldown. And Blessing of the Bronze is your raid-wide buff that reduces the cooldown of major movement abilities by 15% for 1 hour. Time Skip is a very unique ability. It causes you to increase your cooldown regeneration by 1000% for 2 seconds. So you're going to dump all of your cooldowns at the start of the fight, and then you're going to cast Time Skip to get them all back a lot faster. Finally is your most powerful ability. This is Breath of Eons. It's a breath style attack that you fly over the area, breathing onto targets and applying a debuff onto all of them. This debuff is going to accumulate 15% of all damage dealt by your allies with the Ebon Might buff on them. and then at the end of the 10-second effect, it's going to critically strike those targets for that 15%, so that's going to end up being 30% because of the critical strike. If you can coordinate this to make sure that each of your Ebb and Might allies are using as many of their cooldowns at the same time, as well as have this Breath of Eons on, it's going to be such a massive increase of damage. This is where the huge amount of style and performance from this class is going to come. Chrono Ward also turns Breath of Eons into a semi-defensive ability, causing your allies that are affected by the Breath of Eons to also gain a shield that protects them from incoming damage. Alright, so now that we know about all the abilities, let's talk about your stat priority. So of course, intellect is the number one stat, that's your primary, and you're going to get any item that has the most intellect on it as possible. After that, mastery is going to be your most important. Mastery Time Walker causes it so that casting an empowered spell grants shifting sands to one ally, preferring damage dealers. This increases their versatility by 1% based off of your mastery. It's also going to cause the duration of shifting sands, Breath of Eons, and your other helpful auras to be increased based off your current mastery level. Increasing the duration of your buffs and giving that versatility buff are just so massive for this that we definitely need to be stacking really high mastery on this class. Next up is haste. You want to be able to get your spells off a little bit quicker, and the haste is going to make the difference. So mastery and then haste. Critical strike and versatility are pretty on par. Versatility is a little bit weaker than critical strike, but I would take any item that had a higher versatility than critical strike, assuming that the mastery and haste were also there. This class is going to have a special opening pre-pull rotation, as well as then a actual opener before getting into your priority-based rotation. So you're going to need a lot of global cooldowns happening before the start of the fight as the countdown is starting. First, you cast Prescience on your target that ramps up faster. Tip the scales, Blistering Scales onto the tank that's going to be doing the pull. Prescience on your second Prescience target, which is somebody that ramps up a little bit slower. Ebb and Might, and making sure you're near your 4 priority targets for it. And then you begin pre-casting your Living Flame for 2 seconds so that it lands at 0. Then your opener actually begins. That's Fire Breath using that Tip the Scales into Upheaval at level 1. Then Breath of Eons, targeting as many targets as you can. Time Skip to get your cooldowns back faster. Prescience on your first target. Then we spam Eruption plus Living Flame, waiting for Fire Breath and Upheaval to come off cooldown, using Prescience on your second target. And then it all just goes into your regular priority rotation. That is maintaining Prescience on your 2 selected DPS, making sure Ebb and Might is cast if you have less than 4 seconds on the buff, using Fire Breath at maximum rank, and using Tip the Scales every opportunity you can to give a stronger Fire Breath, casting Upheaval to maintain your Ebb and Might buff, casting Breath of Eons every 2 minutes as long as that 2-minute rotation is going to line up with your other DPS's cooldowns, using Time Skip if the cooldown on your empowered spells, both of them, is greater than 15 seconds. Casting Eruption if Ebb and Might is active to extend the duration. Casting Blistering Scales on the active tank. Casting Emerald Blossoms to get the Emerald Blossom buff on multiple targets. And then using Living Flame or Azure Strikes as filler, depending on if you are standing still or moving. All your other skills in your rotation are going to be all about priority on the current boss. So that's going to be when to use Obsidian Scales, when to use Hover, when you're supposed to be removing bleeds and things like that. All those different abilities are really going to shake up from boss to boss, and you just have to know when to use them for that particular encounter. So who should play the Augmentation Evoker? Well, if you got a player that likes to tank but isn't one of your active tanks, or if you got somebody that prefers to heal or might kind of like healing over DPSing, but you don't have a healer slot for them, the mindset for those types of players really fits the Augmentation Evoker well. You can also take whoever your lowest DPS is and get them to switch over to this Augmentation Evoker, because the amount of difference they're going to make to the fight buffing your strongest DPS is going to be more significant than your lowest DPS is able to perform on their own. I hope this guide helped you figure out all about the Augmentation Evoker, how to play it, what it's like, and if it's the class for you. Leave me a comment below of what you think of this video, and any suggestions of videos that you want to see in the future. So glad you guys joined us for this guide, and we will catch you guys next time.